How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 4 of What If Deku Was One Punch Man. And now, let's begin. And now, let's begin the UA Sports Festival, Midnight would yell as the crowd would cheer in excitement. To start this sports festival off, let's begin with a race. Quite an interesting one at that. So, for all of you that don't know what this event's going to be, is there's going to be 3 obstacles. A robot army, an abyss, if you fall in it, you just lose, get eliminated, and a minefield. And the top 40 people that pass through the race first get to move on towards the next competition slash event. The people that are below the 40 don't get to go on and are eliminated, and you all will get to move up to your special seats up in the stands, depending on what your class is. And I would say on, as all of the classes would non-agreement. So, with that, let's begin, she would say as heroes would jump down, pushing all of the students into a small, cramped hallway, as pushing and shoving would ensue, with people trying not to be claustrophobic about it, and it was so small, just the hundreds of kids shoved into one tiny little part of a building. So finally, the doors would creak open, as Izuku would instantly get shoved behind, or would feel a shove from his back, as shoving would continue as many kids would try to just get out of the hallway. Inevitably, Izuku would end up getting out after a very slow and long, grueling process of getting stepped on. So with Izuku now out of the tunnel, he would be looking around. Seeing that everyone had already started running in a certain direction, Izuku would start to sprint off in that, easily catching up with everyone. And as soon as he saw the zero-pointer, he would just bend down before launching himself up in the air using his legs. As he would land on top of the zero-pointer, he would continue to run, making just small dents in the zero-pointer as he would go before jumping off again with so much power that the zero-pointer would start to fall forward with a dent in the backside of its head. So with Izuku flying through the air, he would easily make it towards the end of the race. As Izuku would cross through the finish line, the entire crowd would cheer in amazement. Whoa! That's a UA school record, even for the second and third years. We've never had someone complete the race so quick. That's crazy! President Mike would yell over the speakers, so the crowd would even more roar from excitement. They had witnessed history. A record had just been broken on their own eyes. They just couldn't believe it, them would tell themselves. As finally, after just a couple more minutes, more people would start to cross over the finish line. Once all of the students would end up crossing through the finish line, Midnight would end up seeing all 40 of the students that had passed there. Alright, all of the students that didn't cross the finish line in time, you all will now, along with your teacher, will guide you up to where you will be seated. And now, let's begin with the second event, Midnight would say, as she would then explain what the cavalry battle was going to be, just telling how all of this was going to happen, this and that, and this and that. So with the cavalry battle explained how there's going to be just 3 people carrying someone on top with a headband, and that's basically it. You have to try to steal headbands and get the 4 teams with the highest amount of points get to move on, all of that, as finally she would announce the points. The person in first place, yours, Class 1A, Izuku Midoriya, she would announce as the crowd would cheer, has 10 million points on their headband. As Izuku would almost feel 1,000 eyes dart right onto him, staring down, beating down on him with a glare. As Izuku just wouldn't care, walking up, grabbing his headband before putting it on. As the rest would get their headbands, as Izuku would then have a 5-minute time to make up his team. However, no one seemed to want to join him. Izuku would go around trying to ask some of his friends, however, many of them would just refuse, not wanting to be targeted by the 40 other people in the match. So when the 5 minutes would be up, Izuku would be staring blankly at Midnight before he would raise his hand. Midnight do I have to have a team? Izuku would say, as Midnight would just sort of awkwardly laugh. Well, since no one really wanted to be on your team, I guess he'll have to go alone. Izuku would just shrug his shoulders, saying, oh, okay. I guess that means I'm not going to be held back at all. Izuku would just think to himself as the rounds would begin. Izuku would see everyone trying to crash down on him, running towards him, as Izuku would jump up into the air, flying up above. Izuku would put his arms above his head as he would fall back to the ground, slamming his fists into the ground, sending just this grass and dirt flowing up in the air as flying mud and dirt would fall down onto everyone, causing a distraction. As instantly Izuku would zoom by everyone, grabbing many people's headbands with ease, easily pulling it off of them with such speed and precision. Izuku would continue on putting them around his head, as Izuku would continue on looking for anybody who was sort of challenging him at all. However, when Izuku would look around, no one was challenging him, still in a daze from all of the dirt and dust cloud that Izuku had caused with his just fists. So, with that, Izuku would continue running around capturing everyone's headbands, as finally there was just a select few that still had them. As 20 minutes would end up passing, everyone was chasing around Izuku for headbands, as Izuku would sometimes take them off, looking at the point total before just throwing them into the crowd of people behind him, as they would all fight for him, just hoping to get a chance to make it on to the next round. Well, for every time Izuku did this, it would always be for a very low point headband, like 5 or 10. So Izuku was basically just toying with everyone there, and Bakugo knew this. So he would end up watching Izuku's running pattern, seeing how everyone was running this, and finally his team would come out of nowhere running towards Izuku. As Bakugo would grab one of his headbands, trying to yank it off, over Izuku would duck down beneath Bakugo's arm, grabbing it before throwing him off of his team. As Bakugo would land on the ground, Izuku would pull Bakugo's headband right off of him. However, before he could put it on and put it back on himself, the timer would end. Luckily, Bakugo's team hadn't lost the points just yet, as it still remained somewhat on Bakugo. So Bakugo's team would narrowly, very barely end up passing on to the 1v1 tournament, as Bakugo just give a sigh of relief before snatching his headband back from Izuku, who was just looking on in shock, or just the Bakugo sitting on the ground. Midnight would then announce that everyone who had made it onto the final round would have a 10-minute break before the final event were to begin. Izuku would be sitting down in just a waiting room, as he would end up hearing some of his classmates walking up to him. "Hey, good job, Izuku, on getting first place over the first 2 events. Good luck on the next event. I didn't happen to make it into the 1v1 tournament," one of them would say, this being a Kirishima, as Kirishima ended up wishing Izuku good luck before walking back, just wondering what's going to happen, if Izuku's going to make it on to the finale and all of that, as no one in UA's history had even gotten first in all of the events just yet, and Izuku was looking like he was about to be the first person to get first in every single UA Sports Festival event. Many people in the crowd were hoping to see history once again with such a thing. So when the 10 minutes were up, they would all end up coming out, as Midnight would announce that it was a 1v1 tournament, and the arena had now been constructed. And the first match is going to be Izuku, the first placeholder, and Shinso, the last placeholder, Midnight would say, as both of them would walk up onto the arena. Izuku would wish Shinso good luck as the match would begin. Shinso would start trying to talk to Izuku, however, Izuku wouldn't just be talking, just completely clueless, as Shinso wasn't talking very loud. He wasn't yelling, and so Izuku didn't hear Shinso at all. So with Izuku just blankly staring at Shinso, Shinso would start to get angry before yelling, "Why aren't you answering me? Didn't anyone tell you it's rude not to answer someone?" As Izuku would look on towards Shinso, or just shaking his head. "No, I mean, you were talking to me? I didn't realize you were talking to me." Izuku's answer would suddenly stop, as Shinso would smirk, knowing that he had already won. As Izuku would hear Shinso's voice, "Now walk out of the arena for me, will ya?" However, Izuku would turn around before taking a step, and then another and another, continuing on walking out towards the other side of the arena. However, something in Izuku's mind was ticking. Izuku would travel back into his mind after being brainwashed, as he was then sitting watching through a massive screen, looking on as he was taking increasing steps towards the outside of the arena. As Izuku knew he would end up losing, not wanting to lose to such a stupid thing, not wanting to be brainwashed and end up losing because of it. So Izuku would start to think, how could he do something like this? How could he get out of this brainwashing? Izuku's mind would start racing. He wasn't sure how, as his mother would towards the television screen yelling for Izuku to snap out of it, to snap out of whatever was going on with him. As Izuku would be doing this, some lucky coincidence, all of this bird poop would land right on top of Izuku's head, as that would end up snapping Izuku out of the brainwashing, right an inch away from stepping out. Izuku would look up to see the bird flying away, as he would end up smirking, looking on towards Shinso before running up to him, putting his other hand in front of the one he was winding back, as his fist would be clenched, punching Shinso right across the face with barely any amount of power as to not hurt him, as Shinso would be sent flying back, barely catching himself right about to fall out of the arena, as Shinso would glare on towards Izuku before jumping at him, trying to tackle Izuku. However, Izuku would merely dodge this futile attempt of getting him. As Shinso would be falling backwards, Izuku would push Shinso down to the ground before staring at him. That was quite the nice attempt to defeat me, Izuku would say, as Shinso hadn't said anything, so he could respond to it himself. So with that, Izuku would grab Shinso by the neck before placing him right outside in the balance, with Shinso struggling against him, trying to pull Izuku's grip off of his neck. However, it wouldn't work, as Izuku would set Shinso down onto the ground with his feet touching the grass, as Midnight would then announce, "And Izuku Midoriya moves on to the next round!" As Izuku would smirk before letting go of Shinso, he would say, "That was a nice try, Shinso. You probably should have worked on your, how do I say this, your combat skills, instead of just mostly relying on your quirk. That's a suggestion I would give you," Izuku would say before walking off, as Shinso wouldn't care about what Izuku said, just walking off mumbling to himself like, how could he lose? He had him in his grasp. He was about to move on, but then that stupid bird just had to come in and ruin everything, he would be thinking, as Izuku would now be seen against Todoroki in just the semifinals. He had beaten Ida with a clean victory in just the quarterfinals, and so now Izuku was facing off against Todoroki. Izuku would stare on towards Todoroki, as Todoroki would yell that he was going to beat Izuku with really just his ice quirk, as Izuku would look on towards Todoroki with a look of confusion. "Why just your ice quirk? That's something I've noticed wrong about you. Why do you only use your ice quirk? Why aren't you using your fire quirk? You're basically you would be twice as strong as you are now using your fire quirk. Why don't you use it? You're weaker when you don't use it. You could be far stronger than you are right now if you'd use it. I don't understand it." Suku's just rambling on, just confused. However, Todoroki wouldn't care, just saying, "I'm not going to use that damn bastard's power." With Izuku, something would then hit him. He would realize Todoroki wasn't using his power because he didn't want to. He was using it because he thought it was Endeavor's power. Izuku didn't know the full backstory between Todoroki and Endeavor. However, Izuku did know that something must have been wrong between it. So Izuku would yell out that it's not his power, Todoroki, and that it's his, much like in canon My Hero Academia. As Todoroki would all of a sudden get a realization, oh yeah, he would think, as all of a sudden his flame side would burst out before flames would start barreling on towards Izuku right as the match began. As Todoroki would launch ice and then fire right at him, as the ice would merely cause a distraction, with the fire going in, melting through the ice, trying to reach Izuku. However, Izuku would merely just use his wind from how fast he was moving his arm to cause the fire to go back, flying back towards Todoroki. As Todoroki would try to use ice to block it, however, the ice would easily just melt through, as the fire would continue on, going right back and hitting Todoroki square on. As Todoroki would look on, now badly injured from the fire that had landed a hit directly onto him, as he would know that Izuku was going to easily be able to just defeat his fire with all of the wind. So Todoroki would start to create more and more fire. Many of the fans in the crowd and just would wonder, what's he doing? Doesn't he know that the Izuku's just going to fire that fire right back to him? However, Todoroki would start to spin the fire rapidly and rapidly, as it would start going around in circles as a tornado would end up forming, as Izuku would try to use more wind to try to get it back, but it would only cause it to start spinning faster and faster. As Todoroki would point in the direction where he wanted the fire tornado to go to, as it would start going right towards Izuku. However, Izuku would raise his fist up, slamming it into the ground, creating a hole, as Izuku would continue on, just digging and digging holes, just getting throughout the underground of the arena, as Izuku would end up blocking off the entrance to the hole so that none of the fire could get into Izuku. As Izuku would end up continue on digging to where he suspected Todoroki was, he would end up jumping right out of the ground with his hand in the air, as his hand would come right out of the ground right next to Todoroki's foot. Izuku would reach around grabbing something before yanking it down into the ground, breaking most of this concrete beneath Todoroki, pulling Todoroki down into it. Todoroki, being pulled down into the ground, would try to react by sending fire down towards Izuku. However, it wouldn't work, just sending smoke flying back towards him. As Izuku would pull him down into the ground, into the cavity that he had created, Izuku would punch Todoroki right across the face, before slamming his knee into Todoroki's face as well. As Todoroki would be left unconscious, Midnight would be waiting for something to happen, not being able to see underground as she didn't have an X-ray vision quirk. So Izuku would jump out of the hole before reaching down, grabbing Todoroki by the arm and pulling him up, as the limp body of Todoroki would be pulled up onto the concrete, as Midnight would then announce, "And Izuku Midoriya wins via knockout victory!" She would yell as Izuku would carrying over Todoroki towards Recovery Girl, where she would end up putting him on a stretcher before pushing him off towards just her room. As all of this would be happening, Izuku would be announced to be going up against Bakugo Katsuki in the final round, as Izuku would be seated in the waiting room waiting for him to be called up onto just the stage and arena to face off against Bakugo Katsuki. He would end up being stopped by Bakugo himself. "I've grown quite a lot over the past couple of weeks, Izuku, and I know damn well that I'm gonna beat you today. Don't you think with your little tricks, faking being quirkless, that you're gonna be able to beat me anymore? This is where everything turns around, Izuku," Bakugo would be saying, as Izuku would only just laugh at him. "Oh, sure, Bakugo. Keep telling yourself that. It's not gonna happen. And you know damn well it's not gonna happen either." As finally both of them would be called up onto the arena, as Izuku now onto the arena start to stretch, as Midnight would announce that the match has begun. As Bakugo would launch himself off towards Izuku, using his explosions to barrel onto him, spinning, sending tons upon tons of explosions right on towards Izuku. As the onslaught would continue, as the smoke would end up dispersing, it would reveal that Izuku was gone. Where had he been? Bakugo had been too occupied with firing tons of explosions that he hadn't realized Izuku had already left where he was, merely moving so fast that it left a shadow of that he was still there. As Bakugo would start looking around, not able to find him, Izuku would fly down, grabbing the top of Bakugo's head before yanking him up into the air and slamming him back down onto the ground. As Bakugo would yell out in pain before looking up, grabbing onto Izuku's head, before sending tons of explosions right onto Izuku's arm, burning it severely. However, Izuku would yank his arm back before winding it back again, punching Bakugo square across the face before punching him with an uppercut right there. Very, very not powerful punches at all. As Bakugo would look on, just walking backwards in pain, holding his chest, as Izuku would walk right up to the injured Bakugo, grabbing his head, making sure he didn't move. Izuku would wind his fist back and punch him square in the face, in between his eyes, right on the nose, breaking it instantly, as he would be sent flying backwards. As Izuku hadn't punched him with much force, but how fast he did it caused Bakugo's momentum to just be sent flying back. As Bakugo would land, hitting the cushioned wall behind him, falling down to the ground. And Izuku Midoriya is your UA champion! Would say, as a couple moments later, Izuku would be seen at the top of a podium, with Bakugo standing there having to be tied up, not wanting to have lost in such an embarrassing way, with a silver medal around his neck, along with Izuku with a gold medal around his, Todoroki in third, getting a bronze one. As all of this would be happening, all of the students would be transferred back to the UA school building, as Izuku, along with everyone else, would end up having tons of papers just slapped onto Izuku's desk. However, before Izuku and the rest of his class could read anything, they would be interrupted by someone over the intercom. Can Izuku Midoriya please come down to the office, please? Can Izuku Midoriya please come down to the principal's office? As you would say over the intercom, as Izuku would stand up, walking off towards where it was. We cut back to see Izuku's parents' house, or Inko's house, as she'd be staring on at the TV watching Izuku beat Bakugo. And as Midnight announced that Izuku won, she would jump up in the air and just yelling, "Yeah, that's my boy Izuku, good job!" She would yell now, crying at how successful Izuku has gotten in just a mere couple of months. She would think to herself that, as we now cut back to see Izuku sitting in Nezu's office. Izuku, I'm afraid I don't think you can be a student here at UA anymore. Izuku would stand up, slamming his hands down onto the ground on Nezu's desk. What do you mean? I've performed better than everyone in the first years. What do you mean I'm not allowed to be a student here anymore? You're not expelling me, are you? Izuku would ask angrily towards Nezu, as Nezu would take a sip of his tea before just laughing. Oh, calm down, Izuku, calm down. It's nothing like that. I just wanted to tell you, I think you're capable of being a hero already, Nezu would say, as Izuku would say, what? You think I'm capable of being a hero already? As Nezu would just sort of laugh. Yeah, you're going to have to take a couple of tests, though, with All Might, of course, and a couple of other people that are capable of giving you a hero license along with a Cork license. But the strength you've shown is one of a hero, along with how smart you are, knowing not to kill enemies or not to injure them too much to the point they're going to be stuck in a coma for the rest of their life. You have shown quite the skills, Izuku, and that's why I believe you're capable of being a pro hero already. However, if you do end up passing the tests, I also have an opportunity that I want you to take as well. So if you're willing to take this test, you have to promise me that you'll take the other opportunity that I'm willing to give you. Okay, Izuku would say, still kind of confused on what this other opportunity of Nezu's was. Alright, I'll do it, Izuku would say, as All Might would walk into the office as the tests would then begin. As just around a week later, Izuku having been given the week off to take all the tests, Izuku would stare down at his hero license along with his Cork license, as he would just smile on it. I've done it. I'm already a pro hero, Izuku would say, with the No Cork Man written in bold letters right across Izuku's hero card. This is where my hero adventure begins. Not just yet, Izuku. I'd like to hire you as sort of a helper, a teacher's helper for Aizawa in Class 1A. I want you to keep helping them as much as you can. So you already are quite much smarter than a lot of them in fighting and combat and all of that. So I just want you to go and help Aizawa, of course. Alright, if you can do that, you'd still get to hang out with all of your friends and all of that. You're still not a full teacher, but you are a full hero now, I guess. Nezu would sort of just laugh as Izuku would just sigh. I guess I have to take it, huh? I still get to live in the dorm rooms, right? Nezu would just nod his head. Of course you do. You're a member of Class 1A, of course, Nezu would say. Oh, and I'd also like to meet the student that's going to be taking your place. Izuku would look on questioning towards Nezu, as a purple-haired boy would walk into the room. This is Hitoshi Shinso. He's the brainwashing kid that actually almost beat you in the sports festival. and he's going to be taking your place in Class 1A. So anyway, you're dismissed. You can go stop crimes or something now. As you would say, as the week of hero internships would end up beginning just a week after the UA Sports Festival had taken place. As Izuku would be running around stopping crime everywhere he would, all of a sudden Izuku would end up smelling smoke. So he would end up rushing off. He would see fire in the near distance. However, he would hear just someone just in pain. Izuku would look around before hearing the sounds closer and closer as he would continue on walking towards an alleyway. As Izuku would turn the corner, he would see a shadowy figure standing over a very bright colored hero. Oh, if it isn't another hero. I haven't seen you before. Do you happen to be a new hero by any chance? Izuku would stop the small talk before jumping in the way of Stain or this mysterious figure from the person slumped up against the wall, jumping in, grabbing the person by their neck, yanking them back before putting them outside of the alleyway. Stain, I've been looking for you all over this place. I finally found you. Oh, so I'm guessing you're just another one of those heroes searching for fame by capturing the almighty hero killer. It's a shame. I thought with you saving that you might have thought that he was most important. Not all the fame and money you get up for being a hero. Izuku would just disregard all of Stain's thoughts as he would take a step forward towards Stain. However, his foot would make contact with something that sounded like metal. It was very clunky, of course, as Izuku would look down to see a blue-haired boy with his helmet off, just lying up against the ground, just with his eyes staring on, glaring towards Izuku as if telling him to get out of there. As Izuku would recognize those eyes, it was his own classmate's eyes, Ida. As Izuku would grab Ida right under the shoulders, yanking him out, pulling him out of the alleyway, as well as Stain would merely just watch Izuku do this. Now, Stain, now that there's no one to get in the way of our fight, why don't we begin? Izuku would say as Stain would say, alright, sure. As Stain would get out his katana before rushing towards Izuku, slashing towards him. However, Izuku would dodge instantly. With this now being a real villain, Izuku would wind back his fist, punching Stain square in the face, breaking his nose much like he did towards Bakugo, sending Stain flying backwards as his head would make contact with the wall behind him. Stain's body would slump down onto the floor, completely unconscious from the blow to his head on both sides. As Izuku would call an ambulance along with some cop cars, so they would end up pulling up onto the scene. So they would end up seeing Izuku after tying up Stain, who would then be put into an ambulance along with the two other heroes that had been injured by Stain. However, before anything like that could happen, while the EMTs were transferring Stain into ambulance, a flying gnome would end up coming down onto the ground, trying to grab Stain. However, before any of that could happen, Izuku would jump in the way, pushing Stain out of the way, as the gnome would grab onto Izuku before flying off, thinking that it had captured its target. As he was flying, Izuku would tell them not to just look for him and not to try to shoot the Nomu down, as Izuku thinks he knows where this is going. As this would be happening, Izuku would end up being dropped off right as a warehouse as the Nomu would end up knocking before disappearing into the abyss via a portal. As this knocking would end up happening, the door would all of a sudden open as Izuku, who had put something over his head very quickly so that they couldn't see his face, would be yanked in. As he would end up sitting onto the ground, all of the League of Villains would be standing around Izuku, who was sitting on one of the benches. Ah, if it isn't the hero killer Stain. You were in quite the close one there, weren't you? Being tied up and all. Luckily we saw that the Nomu came through right at the last second. As would be happening, Shigaraki would say, so, why are you wearing that thing over your head? Izuku would grab the thing before throwing it off towards Shigaraki. Damn it, how'd you get here again? You're such a nuisance, Shigaraki would yell towards Izuku as Izuku would just laugh. You just had to disappear right at the last second, thinking you got Stain already. But here I am, Izuku would say, winding back his fist, going for a punch. As he would end up punching Shigaraki, as Shigaraki would slam into the glass behind him, shattering many of the cups and just dishes behind him instantly, as many of the other villains would stand up about to attack him. However, a ghoulish portal would open up. "Stand down. I'll take care of him. If it isn't Izuku Midoriya, otherwise known as No Cork Man. You're quite the interesting one, aren't you? You don't have a cork, and yet you are highly powerful. You also don't have a dad. That's also something. Quite interesting, of course. But anyway, who cares? I'm not willing to deal with you right now. I'm far too weak for that right now, so why don't you go ahead and be gone?" All for One would say. However, Izuku would jump into action, punching All for One right across the head as its helmet would shatter, breaking off into many different pieces. As All for One would act instantly, grabbing Izuku, trying to grab Izuku. However, Izuku would dodge this, falling into a ghoulish portal, as Izuku would then return right back to the front of UA campus. And that is where I'm going to leave this What If off, everyone. I hope you all did enjoy part 4 of What If Deku was One Punch Man. I hope you all did enjoy this part along. I hope you all do enjoy this series. And yeah, I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.